We now live in New York is Gloria J. Browne-Marshall, a social justice attorney, professor of constitutional law, and also the author of A Protest History of the United States. Really good to have you on the program. I'd like you to put these protests into the larger context of protests in U.S. history. How significant are these ones?
Oh, these protests are quite significant. During the anti-Vietnam War protests, we had the largest numbers in the come out into the streets. And during the civil rights protests, smaller numbers except for the March on Washington in 1963, but you had so many protests taking place for years on end. Know that the First Amendment gives the right of freedom of speech, of course, petition the government for a redress of grievances, freedom of assembly. But we've seen under this presidency the down on so many different Americans, 2 lives taken that the state is allowed to participate in. The propaganda being used, calling people domestic terrorists if they decide to stand up against it. This is a horrific time in America, and unfortunately, first before it gets better.
Gloria, I want to apologize to our viewers. We have a bit of issues with your audio, but I hope we can still continue, because when you look back at previous protests, what does it take for these kind of protests to actually have a meaningful impact and achieve real change?
In order for the protests to achieve real change, it means prolonged. It means that people have to realize that you don't expect massive change by Monday. I think the protests need to be more organized. They need to be with a goal, actually articulate what they want, not just that they're protesting against authoritarianism and regime, but also what are we protesting for? For democracy, for diversity, for health, for literacy. I think for these protests, we need to also protest in the trial of the officers involved in the murders of not just these 2 people, but also Keith Porter, who was shot by officer back on December 31st, and nothing's been done in that case either.
Gloria J. Browne-Marshall, author of A Protest History of the United States. Really good to talk to you. Thank you so much.